Beware of spoilers, you have been warned.
Steven Universe. Continuing on with season 5. Man, I remember at the start of the season how suspicious I was about how Diamond killed another Diamond. How Pink was murdered by her crazy sister, White Diamond. Things escalated quickly. We are finally in Homeworld. We are so used to seeing the gems on Earth living their life outside of their roles, but being able to see gems in their home turf, seeing the intended roles in action, and seeing what Team Earth fought so hard to be free of, this was something I looked forward to for a very long time. Did they actually try to kill Lars? And did Steven's Rapunzel power resurrect him as a pink zombie? And his hair is like Lion's mane? This pocket dimension is crazy, bro. Also, can we talk about how we finally saw the truth of what Steven is? The Diamonds insisted that Steven was just pink, and Steven wondered something similar. Rose has said, "You are half of me," but did she mean that in a Horcrux way? I fell out of my chair when Steven's gem was taken from him. Turns out Steven was Steven all along.
Always has been.
Which is such an interesting layer to Steven as a character. For the longest time, Steven was trying to live up to his mom's name and felt pressured to be his mom, but now he knows he is just himself. And that'll add a different anxiety later, but this was a huge milestone in Steven's arc of self-discovery. Now, I remember during the trial when that Pearl was about to conclude Pink was killed by a diamond, I thought it was going to say she was killed by her pearl, and now that's coming back full circle. It was a pearl. But bro, our Pearl is Pink Diamond's Pearl, and Pink was Rose and Quartz, and Steven's mom was Pink the whole time, and the Pearl-Rose dynamic finally makes so much sense now that we know the roles of Pearls, and this makes Pearl, not a rebel because she's still following orders of Rose after all this time, always, and this is such a huge, big plot twist, This literally makes Pearl's angst toward Greg make so much more sense. Pearls were literally created to love and be devoted to their diamond. Pearl would break the universe for her pink diamond. Greg was just a human that existed. He did so little to warrant Rose's affection and eventual demise, while Pearl sacrificed literally everything and did everything for Rose. That was her purpose in life. The pain Pearl feels every day, how she loves and cares for Steven so much despite him being the embodiment of what essentially was a betrayal?
It's over, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it over?
I was literally crying. Pink Pearl is such a story on their own, and I thought Garnet was the OTP of the show. Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl speak so highly of Rose as well, but she wasn't exactly the perfect person, as Steven eventually questions. The Pink Pearl story is so complex and raw, I might have to do a whole separate analysis on its own someday. 2 episodes left, and they literally have never mentioned White Diamond. I've been waiting for at least a dedicated name drop, and when they did, she was mentioned as something else. Then they went on a quest to meet with her, and when we saw her Pearl, this was terrifying in the moment. I had no idea what to expect. She looked crazy. Steven hanging out with these diamonds is like Atreus hanging out with the Pantheon in Asgard and God of War Ragnorok, but all this content on Homeworld is something that I've been pretty much craving since season 1. Now, I'm always freaking out over the Steven fusions with their gems, but I was on my feet when I saw Obsidian. Now here, at the end of all things, is not the end. So let me talk about all the DLC of the show. The movie, not much to say really. The musical aspect was where it was at. I mean, Patti LuPone came to eat, as she always does. This was a good independent epilogue. As I mentioned before, Rose saw the potential in what gems could be, Steven saw the potential in what they are. His school is designed for gems to find their own purpose and exist the way they want to. And of course, for plot, Steven once again has to confront how Rose Pink Quartz Diamond just wasn't the bestest person and made mistakes that Steven once again must fix. The epilogue season. This extra season is more or less what the movie was. Steven's angst is explored a bit more as he takes on so much pressure and expectation. It really reminds me of Avatar Aang and his son Tenzin. They were the only ones of their kind for so long, and they, especially Tenzin, had so much pressure to rebuild a dead culture from literally nothing. Overall thoughts, let me bring out the big negatives in the room. Not an exact flaw in the show itself, just general criticism against the characters themselves. Steven had shitty parents. Even Rose, who was dead, she could have left behind a bit more instruction because Steven just felt so lost and no one could ever understand. He was the only one of his kind, and there were parts of him that only Rose could teach, but Steven had to learn by himself, which often occurred during traumatic events. Like, she clearly knew how to use VHS tapes. Why weren't there more? The gems were collectively the best parents. Garnet gave wisdom, Pearl gave structure, and Amethyst was able to connect better on an emotional level. But they had no idea how to raise a human in the same sense that Greg had no idea how to raise a gem. But the gems weren't just gems. They rebelled from their original way of life and adapted to being free beings on Earth. They were actively trying to understand humans for Steven's sake, though failing miserably for comedic events. Greg was just like, I know nothing about gems, so here you go. Like, he didn't even try. Greg was low-key an absent father. I get he'd never be able to understand gems, but would living in that house really put him in anybody's way? Was it really that hard to leave his van, at least on the beach outside of the house, so he could at least be close by and not just across town? Like, it didn't feel like joint custody at all. Greg had his visitation rights, a situation that he placed himself. Like, what a man thing to do, to just trust the mom to do it right. Greg was a nice guy, but not a good parent. He provided balance when Steven needed to be nourished by his human side away from the gem side, but that's all. Being someone whose parents had divorced with one parent not stepping up when he had the chance, I just feel like if I were in Steven's circumstance, I'd be a bit unhappy with my father. Consistency matters. You don't just get to live in your van and hang out with your son whenever he feels like visiting. There's just so much to nitpick about his parenting, and it's just not enough to justify he did the best he could with the circumstance argument, at least for me. Steven had a good relationship with the 4 parents he knew, and they were all very supportive when he needed them most, but really, Steven kind of raised himself. Now, going past my soapbox era, this show, overall, amazing, and is a Cartoon Network classic you should not sleep on. The art style, the music, the songs, this was such a cohesive animated experience. Of course, it may seem to start off as the silly kids show, even The Last Airbender started off as much for a while, but there is so much heart and depth to the story and characters. Many complexities are shown within the plot and in characters themselves. So many ideals and concepts were explored not just through character, but also through lore and universe building.
Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, and Steven!
But not just them. Lapis, Peridot, Connie, at least several characters you could become utterly attached to thanks to the honest presentation, wholesome moments, and deep character analysis. For me, Pearl is my number 1 hoe, something she wishes Pink would say. I always loved her design in contrast to the rest of the core group. She's influenced by graceful ballerinas, not just in movement and style, but also through her perfectionist attitude. Her deep connection as Pink's Pearl had implications, revelations, and depressing moments, and overall just made the character so layered and unique. But yeah, Steven Universe, GOAT, peak animation, will definitely watch again. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Alright, it's time for a Tim Burton triple feature, starting with Beetlejuice. I've seen almost every Tim Burton film. He's by far one of my favorite directors of all time. Each movie is so stylistic, gothic, and heartwarming, even Sweeney Todd, but that might just be me. But it all started here. Beetlejuice. Right from the start, you see the different Burtonisms that you see in every Burton movie. Tim Burton has a unique art style that's easy to recognize, and like all his other movies, Beetlejuice really delves deep on very human issues despite the fantasy aspect. And of course, it's not a true Tim Burton movie without an enchanting score by Danny Elfman. Good directors seem to know how to cast their films perfectly. Beetlejuice is no exception here. Catherine O'Hara is a true standout in this movie as Delia. Of course, the star of the show is Michael Keaton as the demon himself, an iconic performance if there ever was one. But the only other that can be deemed as an icon as Keaton and Beetlejuice is Queen Winona Ryder as the ever-iconic Lydia Deetz. Winona's career truly started here, and since this movie she's been worshipped by every little strange and unusual outcast in the world. Even 30 years later, she's still praised as a 90s legend and gothic icon, and it's always a joy to see her portrayal as Lydia. When people watch Beetlejuice, I feel like Adam and Barbara's storyline is overshadowed despite them being the main characters with the most screen time. Beetlejuice and Lydia just rightfully steal the show, however the dead couple's plot actually gives interesting insight to Burton's concept of death in this movie. The rules for ghosts and the afterlife are well thought through and add a great level of lore to the story that may go underappreciated. What should not go underappreciated is the musical adaptation of this film. I have to add this here at the end because Beetlejuice fans need to know the musical is actually amazing. When I watch the movie, all I think about is the musical. When I listen to the musical, all I think about is the movie. Alex Brightman and Sophia Ann Caruso as Beetlejuice and Lydia simply brought magic to the characters we already knew and loved, both as great tributes to the original cast while giving their own Broadway spin. The songs are fun and have already become essential to my Halloween playlist, and the musical overall is the perfect celebration to this iconic 80s movie that continues to be the symbol for every Halloween season. Mars Attacks. Okay, this is a weird one, even for Burton. It's interesting knowing the Ed Wood tribute film Burton did right before this, for him to turn around and also make an absurd sci-fi experience. This is not one of his most known films. It's definitely for a very specific audience, but that's what gives it its charm. The cast? Okay, just hear me out. Jack Nicholson, Glenn Close, Annette Bening, Pierce Bronson, Danny DeVito, Martin Short, Sarah Jessica Parker, Michael J. Fox, Natalie Portman, and I guess what could be considered a weird pre-fame cameo of Jack Black? What the heck, bro? The most notable parts of the movie are the design of these Martians and also that weird robot lady. Like, OMG, that is creepy AF. The way she moves. Ew. Ugh. Good job on the actress for her 4 minutes on screen, I guess. Her only job was to be weird, and she was. Look, this is not a great movie, but Tim Burton wanted to make a weird sci-fi movie, and he did. It's exactly what you expect, and I respect the movie and Burton for this. Definitely give it a watch if you haven't. It's not a masterpiece, but it'll make you feel like you're tripping for a good hour and a half. Dark Shadows. This is one of the most underrated Burton movies ever, and I don't know why so many people turn away from it. First of all, the Tim Burton aesthetic is a vibe on its own, but you mix this vibe with like 60s, 70s culture, and you create this dual aesthetic that works so well. Music, set design, and brilliant costuming by Colleen Atwood all help contribute to making this the perfect gothic 70s tale. The cast in Burton's films are usually great. Of course, we got Johnny Depp leading this expedition, Helena Bonham Carter here as well, Bella Heathcote as Vicky. That girl looks like she's straight out of the 60s, 70s. Michelle Pfeiffer never misses. Chloe Grace Moretz, Yas Queen, one of my favorite actors from my generation. And please give a round of applause for my lesbian crush, Eva Green. She said rent was due. This is literally one of her best performances. Also, shout out to Johnny Lynn Miller, who played the very minor role of the brother, dad, uncle guy. If you only know him from this movie, you have absolutely no idea how talented this guy is. I'm glad he had the opportunity to work with such a great cast and a brilliant director. Also, this is a Tim Burton vampire rom-com story. A vampire out of time. The humor just hits. Like, how am I not supposed to love this movie? Star of the week, our favorite regional manager that actually had some range. Steve Carrell was a 60s kid that had a fairly normal childhood in the New England area. He actually went to college as a history major and got into theater at his university's theater program. He was part of the college's stand-up comedy group, which I guess he was really good at. I mean, history, acting. He was at a lose-lose situation in terms of real jobs, LMAO. He spent the 80s doing random jobs and acting gigs. He started taking bigger steps toward an acting career in the 90s, appearing in numerous short-lived sketch comedy shows. He crossed paths with Stephen Colbert a lot during both of their early careers in multiple settings, so that's cool. Rip the Late Show. His first major breakthrough was being part of the main cast in Anchorman, alongside Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd, among others. This was then followed by his first major lead in a film, 40-Year-Old Virgin, which ended up being a box office hit. But that didn't release until after the first season of The Office and the filming of Little Miss Sunshine, which is one of my favorite movies. In 2005, Carrell was on the brink of mainstream fame. He had already done a really well drama movie that earned a SAG for Best Film Ensemble. He was in a hit comedy with Will Ferrell, about to see the release of his own comedic hit. All of this was happening in between the first and second seasons of what would become one of the greatest comedies of all time.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
The Office! I literally can't think of a more memeable show. Literally every other episode has a meme, still very much used on the internet on a daily basis. It's what influenced me to watch the show in the first place. I've watched through twice now and it's still funny. I think I brought it up on the podcast here before. It's literally one of my favorite shows of all time. Top 10 easy. And Steve Carell was the very heart of Dunder Mifflin. He's been nominated for Emmys and Screen Actor Guild Awards like 6 times or something. Also receiving multiple Golden Globe nominations with 1 win, which means Michael Scott made Steve Carell the best of the best. In the 2000s, he also appeared in 2 Jim Carrey movies, Bruce Almighty and Dan in Real Life. He was also in Get Smart with Anne Hathaway. This was the very first thing that I have ever seen him in. I watched the movie as a kid with my dad when he rented it on Redbox, and it ended up becoming one of my favorite movies. Steve Carell has dabbled in voice acting before, appearing in films like Horton Hears a Who and Over the Hedge, but we gotta address the bananas in the room. Carrell has portrayed Gru and the Despicable Me franchise for God knows how long now. Yeah, he's great, but by gods, I'm so annoyed by those minions. Like, I'm not part of the majority of the world that seems to like them. They are the true despicable ones. But can't deny the cultural impact of the franchise, and Steve Carell is a part of it. Since departing the cast of The Office, we've seen a lot of dramatic roles from Carell through the 2010s. This has included Welcome to Marwen and Freeheld. He also co-starred with Timothée Chalamet in Beautiful Boy, which ended up being one of Timothy's early successes. He has done his fair share of comedy films too, of course. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, Not Good, Very Bad Day, Hope Springs, Date Night, Cafe Society, Seeking a Friend for the End of the World, Last Flag Flying, The Way, Way Back, and Crazy Stupid Love. He was in the films Battle of the Sexes and The Big Short, receiving Golden Globe and Screen Actor Guild nominations for both. He appeared in the ensemble cast of Vice with Christian Bale, Amy Adams, and Sam Rockwell. He was a lead role in the film Foxcatcher, Steve's biggest critically acclaimed role yet, apparently with nominations for literally everything: Oscars, Golden Globe, SAG, BAFTA. Ending the decade off with a return to television, Steve Carrell appeared in 2 seasons of The Morning Show, which led to yet more Emmy and SAG nominations. In recent years, Carrell has actually made his Broadway debut in the play Uncle Vanya. He's been in a few films, including Irresistible and Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. He reunited with John Krasinski when he voiced a character in his family film If. He was nominated for Screen Actors Guild Award for his role in the miniseries The Patient. He has also appeared in the comedy Space Force and most recently The Four Seasons. The very, very most recent thing he's done was appear in Jesse Armstrong's film Mountainhead. As a Succession fan, can totally see Steve Carell work well with a script by Armstrong, so definitely have to check that movie out. So yeah, one of the most talented and prominent actors of his age. While he shines best with comedy, he really hits you hard with his dramatic roles as well. He has had the ability to make me both laugh and cry. I always know I'm gonna have a good time when I see his name in the cast list.
God of War Ragnarok. 4 years waiting, and wow, it is an excellent sequel, and I'm only several hours in. Right off the bat, it's a beautiful continuation of the last game in both story and gameplay, and they waste no time giving you a first-hand experience as to what Kratos and Atreus are up against, with Thor's grand introduction in the first hour of the game. Very much like Baldur's intro from back in the day. I loved how the last game expanded Kratos' story into another pantheon and a part of the world. And now, we're in it. And I am so excited to continue this experience. So much can be said about the graphics, the music, the gameplay, the story. I've seen about 1/4 of what Ragnarok has to offer, and I'm already so blown away.
That's it for this week. Be sure to follow this podcast and please follow my Twitter and blog at Hollis Films to follow my journey experiencing the entertainment industry's greatest stories. And let me know what you've been fangirling over this week. Thank you for joining me, and I'll talk to you again next week.